My name is Christopher Peter and welcome to the Christopher Peter Review. The Christopher Peter Review provides original content discussing salient current events in our political environment, business community, global world, domestic society, and sports and entertainment. In each of the 5 segments, the focus will always be to center on facts, evidence, and data. Please experience the 5 podcast segments that make up the Christopher Peter Review.
Welcome to the CRC conversation on the Christopher Peter Review, where we discuss leading current events impacting our economy, public policy, and society. In this edition, we are going to discuss ideology and some drawbacks. People generally want principled leaders when we really need people who can manage the moments based on situational factors, and not simply relying on partisan prescriptions. For instance, conservatives always want to lower taxes and progressives always want higher tax rates. In reality, where the rest of us live, there are times to lower taxes to boost our economy and times to raise taxes to avoid what is described as a hot economy. The issue really is how our political system has devolved into a dogfight between ideological rigid hyper-partisan opponents, where we the voters play a role in this by treating anyone who compromises or shows a willingness to negotiate as defective and unworthy of the office they seek. Is there a solution or a path in another direction?
I am always interested in hearing why people vote for who they vote for. And even more interested in their reactions when that person does not deliver what they hoped they would, when there was more than enough evidence to prove otherwise. The media always talks about how people are tired of partisan politics, but I am not sure they are truly tired of it and that the people are actually tired of it. I think part of the solution to avoiding hyper-partisan and ideological rigid candidates is to stop obsessing over the words stated by a candidate, their campaign, or supporter organizations, and pay a little more attention to their record, the outcomes of those records, and what the experts in the hot issue field state are the problems and possible solutions. I am not saying ignore the messaging, speeches, and platforms, but expand beyond them. I think people who are liberal, or progressive will support candidates who they believe they will personally like, regardless of if the policies that candidate supports will harm their personal well-being. There is a disconnect between feelings over the politician and the actions by those politicians. On the other hand, conservatives are generally supportive of politicians who promise to protect freedoms, lower the cost associated with government, and promote safety and security. They do not always see if those promises become reality. We are always going to have hyper-partisans and ideologically rigid governments because the calculus of getting elected is known. If you are in a left-leaning district, focus on likability and your record will be completely ignored. If you are in a right-leaning base, play up safety concerns, freedom, and the cost of living, and your likability issues may be overlooked. Very few candidates focus on being both likable and effective. The appeal Trump is offering voters is that he will restore our border security, change the plight of our economy, and improve our failing foreign policy. On the other hand, Biden continues to market that he is not Trump, not even offering a valid excuse for his performance as president. So Americans do not have a front-runner that is willing to acknowledge the need to be both likable and effective. They are simply holding on to what their pollsters are telling them will be effective to get to 270 electoral votes. So, if we are really against hyper-partisanship and ideological rigidity, then we need to show that we are not rigid in how we vote and the parties we support. Republicans and Democrats will take their 40% of the electorate and hope to gain one more of the independents who actually get out and vote than the other one. If we are ideologically rigid and heavily partisan, why should we expect anything to be different?
At the end of the day, does this have a real-world impact? We are in a free nation where people are able to like what they want regardless of how it truly impacts them. People have the right to be wrong at times. Unfortunately, enough people making the wrong choices impacts the proportion of the people making the right choices.
Our politics usually are like a pendulum over time. Society chooses one direction until that choice does not stand the test of time. Then we choose to support another direction. That is usually the cycle we live under. Now, the rigidity is used to create generational politicians. In many of these areas, the outcomes may be tolerable at first, but dwindle over time. There are many areas suffering through generational decline because of rigidity. We are always aware of this problem when we look at areas opposite of where we reside. If you live in a conservative area, you decry the liberal political machines and vice versa. For instance, we see progressive liberal politicians complain about not being able to pass gun control because of lifelong conservatives, who call out the rampant crime in the areas these progressive liberal represent. People are free to choose who they want, but they need to accept the outcomes of their decisions. If you ignore the outcomes of elected officials, then you accept their shortcomings.
Our politics sometimes make politicians take actions with the right intentions, but the wrong approach. For instance, the push for increasing the number of insured people was a good idea. Forcing people to buy something they do not perceive to need at a price they cannot negotiate or price compare was not the best way forward. Pushing for more environmentally friendly and sustainable policies is not a bad policy goal. The obsessive manner and fear-mongering is not the proper approach. I think we can agree that the people focusing on carbon capture technology are by far more helpful than those who are trying to make every normal everyday behavior a question of climate impact. And the people pushing for pro-life policies have the right intention, but the hardline stance is what is causing blowback, where there are no exceptions for the traditional compromise. The annual number of abortions was going down because of the effectiveness of the pro-life movement and others who helped offer alternatives and support for pregnant women. Is the hysteria-driven madness that engulfs every issue impacting our ability to accomplish needed political goals with reasonable balanced policies?
I think we saw this recently with the far-right Republicans who successfully scored the biggest win for the pro-life movement in our generation in striking down Roe v. Wade. There are always unexpected consequences of any policy action or apparent victory. All the people who cheered political victories with gun control legislation were probably surprised by judicial defeats later on. People or organizations do not abandon their prior political stances. Republicans who lost because of the ruling are probably not happy with the party's inability to effectively message following the landmark ruling. And the interesting aspect was the progress the movement was already making with reducing the controversial practice over time. The far-right politicians advancing policies without any accommodation are performing just as badly as the left-leaning ones who attempted to make the termination of life normalized.
Finally, Democrats try to weave racism and other forms of discrimination into every aspect of American life. They also try to connect everything to climate change. Now, it seems like they are connecting the two with environmental racism. As much as they market that they are the party of mainstream, the progressives running the party continue trying to normalize radical ideas without any shred of evidence.
They want us to believe everything is systemic racism. The real problem we are seeing is systemic stupidity. The progressives do not have any evidence that their ideas are workable and beneficial, so they cloak them in buzzwords to drive emotional support from the feel first think later base. For instance, the new rule where people who pay their bills will have to pay more to subsidize people who fail to live up to their commitments. How does any rational person feel that this is fair and equitable? Not only is this kind of thinking radical, but it has consequences that we have seen before. Something called the financial crisis. The far left does not want to acknowledge that outcomes are a result of choices. Not exclusively, but the majority drivers of what happens in our lives are the decisions we make, the actions we take, and the attitudes we demonstrate. We place too great of an emphasis on luck. But, the reality is people create the opportunity they receive or the consequences they face. There are things in life we do not control. We do not control if we are born disabled or have a genetic-related illness. But many aspects of life are decided by moments in life. And we cannot continue having this imbalance where we reward bad decisions and poor behaviors by making the people who do the right thing and make the right choices work harder and take home less to comfort those who position themselves in the worst spot in life. And we need to stop fabricating division, which only creates real division. We need to stop storytelling and focus on real facts. Address the real drivers of why communities struggle. Address the real reasons why people experience negative externalities. The continued storytelling is only making the bad outcomes more prevalent. We do not want a struggle to be comfortable, but motivating people to want more and get more out of their life. Reward good decision-making and good behaviors.
I thank you all for experiencing this edition of the CRC Conversation. Make sure to come back next week to experience more here on the Christopher Peter Review.
Welcome back to the Christopher Peter Podcast, the lead segment of the Christopher Peter Review. The focus will continue to be on discussing salient current events and topics in the business and industry environment. I think our last two topics, the investor perspective and capitalist mindset, provide a mental framework for what our approach will be with the CRC fund and other topics in this series. We will search for opportunities, understand the risk associated with those opportunities, determine potential strategies to maximize these opportunities, and decide whether the brands we review or topics we discuss are a fit for the fund or a fit for a general investor. Sometimes something may not be fit for one person but is for another. Now, in this episode, I want to focus on the assets that I think will be a good start to building the CRC fund. My ideology with investing in this fund is to experience stable growth that provides returns to use for this podcast. In order to do so, I will need to acquire the right assets. Therefore, I'm going to discuss some of the common financial asset classes investors typically hold and see which one closely fits our needs. And which ones may fit a current need. As the fund grows, hopefully, I will be able to diversify with additional asset classes. The fun part of anything is being able to determine a strategy, see if it works, and learn what made it work or what you could do better. And seeing the hard work pay off. We will begin our discussion with the two most common assets that we all have heard about. When you hear the word investing, you automatically think of stocks and bonds. Right? These are time-tested assets that are commonly purchased by individual, institutional, and commercial investors. Let us start in alphabetical order. What is a bond? A bond is essentially a loan with a specified return rate. A bond note contains the face value of the bond at the date of issuance, the interest rate that will compensate you for your investment, and the call date or maturity date, when you can collect the face value plus the interest. Corporations issue bonds to fund new capital projects or fund new projects. Governments issue bonds to secure funding for government services, construction projects, public infrastructure, and other public initiatives. So, in layman's terms, you are purchasing a bond to serve as a creditor to the issue, and you will receive compensation at higher rate than if you were lending those same funds through a bank. The periods for these loans may vary. Some bonds, primarily treasury bills or T-bills, may be paid the following year. Some may pay 30 years later. Depends on the structure. A bond is more effective than a loan because it allows the issuer to secure greater funds. Instead of one line of credit, you have the potential for numerous lines, and you can be creative with payment periods. When you typically get a loan, the banks dictate the terms, for the most part. Bonds afford the issuers the ability to set the terms with respect to current market conditions. And the issuer can later pay returns from the proceeds of the economic activity or tax revenue at a more convenient time to the holder of the bond at the time of maturity. As with other financial assets, the holder of the bond may change over time. When interest rates change, the value of the bonds fluctuates. Therefore, the original holder may want to sell the asset to recoup as much value before future depreciation or take advantage of appreciation. When you are purchasing a bond from the market and not a new issue, then you will have to worry about purchase price and yield rates, because the face value on the bond will not be the price that will be charged to own the bond at that point. The yield rate, the rate of return, will be different because the interest rate will undoubtedly be different than the rate at the time of issuance. But keep in mind that bonds are generally one of the safer assets to own. Potential buyers can assess the risk levels with bond ratings published by companies like Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, which are the three commonly used agencies that financial firms assess risks with bond issuers. Bonds are safe and stable, but not as lucrative as other assets. Remember, the higher the risk of an asset, the greater the potential return for investing in that asset. On the completely other end of the spectrum is a financial asset that is more volatile. The financial asset with the greatest reported returns on investment is stocks. Stocks are probably the most commonly known asset and the one most commonly associated with investing. When you hear the word investing, you may think of stocks, stockbrokers, and equities. In our financial news, the daily changes in stock prices are the big focus of commentators covering this market. There are different types of stock assets. Common stock is one where each individual stock purchase affords you a small share of ownership of the company. Instead of offering a bond, a company or organization can decide to offer shares of ownership to entice investors to fund projects, where value generated from appreciation is what compensates the investor, not a direct return. The company does not receive any additional money for trades outside of the initial offering or additional offerings. Outside of the initial public offering or additional public offerings, you are purchasing shares of ownership from other owners who want to liquidate their position. If the company wants to provide assets that are not tied to ownership or treated as debt, they may raise funds with preferred stock, which does not contain the ownership share, but may have a higher dividend than what is provided to their common stockholders. The common stockholders have voting rights to address governance issues, while preferred stockholders simply reap the benefits without say in the strategy. Stocks overall are highly volatile, which is why they are so lucrative. The higher the risk, the greater the reward. Trading stock requires data analysis, research, and timing. Understanding the direction of the economy as well as the respective industries can help make stock investing very worthwhile. There are some benefits to going to a buffet rather than a traditional sit-down restaurant. In a traditional restaurant, you have to pick from the menu and commit to your choice for the most part. Not a big deal. But there are some situations where you may not be completely sold on one item or another without experiencing it in the past. One of life's risks. In investing, there are many types of funds that afford you the ability to get a little bit of everything if you are not sure which individual brand or company you want to invest in. There are mutual funds that may specialize in specific industries. Funds that may invest in all public players in a market or the top however many the managers choose. These funds help to diversify your investment across multiple organizations without having to understand each individual company. Also, they are much more affordable in the fact that you get a bit of many for the price of one share in that fund. There are ETF funds which give you a bit of everything on a particular exchange or index. Of course, with funds you need to determine what fees are charged and what rules may be in place for them. No-load funds have no charge to them. Just something to consider if you ever decide to invest or take a greater role in selecting your assets. Of course, people also invest in other assets like real estate, where you either purchase an additional property or home to rent out or flip. Real estate is a timeless method of expanding wealth as well. But there are costs and risks associated. Flipping homes requires somewhat high capital investments and project management to ensure the turnaround times allow for the proper returns to continue the practice. Renting properties can be a steady income, but at the same time there are risks with maintaining the property. But real estate is a great way to earn steady income over time. There are also real estate investment tools that allow you to invest in a real estate-backed fund, where you can get the same benefits as a mutual fund but with real estate. The commoditization of assets really has opened new avenues for investors. For instance, you could invest in loan pools rather than issuing out loans for interest. These pools are used to generate loans and then provide returns to investors. Expands capital access needed to fund home, auto, and other loans, while creating a new avenue for investors to make their money work for them. There are modern financial assets like cryptocurrency and other forms of commoditized trading, like land rights and usage rights. But those are ones that I do not plan to include in this fund at this time. As you have seen recently, the crypto market has taken a hit and is unstable. Something we will keep an eye on for the future. So now, I will need to decide what type of financial assets to include in this new fund. While I like the idea of real estate, it is not a great fit for this fund at this moment. The main staple of the fund will be stock because those financial assets are time-tested and deliver value. The focus will be determining what companies and brands will be part of my selected investments. Also, there will be some mutual funds, and other index funds. As you can tell, I am a big proponent of diversification and risk mitigation. So, I will aim to have a balanced portfolio. At some point, I will bring in bonds as well. But maybe not at the beginning. As I start to make selections, I will review brands here to determine whether I will invest, not invest, or delay. I will look at the performance of not only the organization, but the industry or industries it competes in. A company may have strong growth, but the overall industry performance can impact your decision to invest or not. At the same time, a company may be struggling while the industry is growing, signaling poor performance. All of which could be simply a momentary issue rather than a problem that defines the organizations. Like the issues discussed in the Christopher Peter Review, the facts, data, and evidence will be the focus on whether companies make the cut or not. In my next episodes, you will experience these brand reviews and data analysis behind them. Again, I am not offering financial advice, but just hoping to inspire people to consider investing and to learn more about the brands and companies that offer great value to our economy, society, and quality of life. Please continue to visit the CRC channel at www.crcchannel.com and experience my main podcast, The Christopher Peter Review, at www.crcreview.com. I thank you in advance for your viewership and look forward to our next discussion. Welcome to CRC Sports, where we discuss salient current events in the world of sports. In this episode, I am going to discuss villains in sports. Sports are not just a display of athleticism, but also features games within the game. Sometimes those games can make a more memorable event than the actual game. Let us hear from Jose about villains in our sports.
Sports, like life, needs drama to be entertaining. We need heroes, villains, and storylines. This is somewhat human nature in a society that spends a great deal of time watching movies, sports, television, and online entertainment. We need stimulus to catch our attention. Need events to drive conversations and media content. For instance, basketball fans have received plenty of emotional stimulus from the NBA playoffs to this point, which has been marred by high-profile incidents with notable players. The biggest one obviously is the situation in Sacramento featuring Golden State Warriors star Draymond Green stomping on the chest of Kings player Sabonis, after Sabonis grabbed his leg, preventing Green from continuing his transition to offense. Even the series featuring our Sixers and the Brooklyn Nets has been an extremely physical series, where the Nets players seem to overcome their lack of talent with cheap shots and petulant antics. Maybe they are taking out their frustrations on giving up James Harden for Ben Simmons, who never plays. To be fair, basketball is not the only sport marred with incidents. We have seen incidents in football where players purposefully step on other players or swing helmets at them. We see incidents in hockey with cheap shots that can end careers. Any sports fan knows all the unwritten rules in baseball created to respond to bad behaviors. In the world of sports media, there is always a voice willing to defend the behavior of the villain, normalizing it to some degree. Voices telling the media and fan base that we do not understand because we are not players. The real questions are: is there a need by sports leagues to better monitor behaviors, or are we just becoming more sensitive towards these actions because of the overall society situation?
To be a successful professional athlete, you have to play with high emotions, and sometimes that highly emotional state can lead you to behave outside of the limits of acceptability. There is a role for league commissioners because they must maintain the brand and the perceived integrity of their respective leagues. Many of the sports media reflected back to the malice in the palace when talking about the Green incident. Because you have the combination of high-profile and highly talented athletes running on high emotions, getting in these heated exchanges and then engaging with highly emotional fan bases who may be liquored up to a degree that they feel what they lack in athleticism and strength may be made up by sheer number and drunkenness. A bad combination if you are trying to avoid another event. And we continue to see fan and player incidents. So the leagues have to balance the safety of the players, the fans, and everyone who attends these games. And also the people watching at home who do not want to witness these incidents. Also sponsors who do not want to be associated with negativity. In the heat of these moments, the incidents can look much worse than they do a day or two later. Especially when you view these events from the point of view of which team you are supporting at the moment. I watched the Green incident and immediately thought the referees had to toss Green. I watched the replay, saw the grab of his leg, but still felt the ejection was warranted. I think without the antics following the incident, Green should not have been suspended. But, you cannot do all those taunts with the commissioner right there. Just not a good look and not a good position to put your employer in. The Warriors won the game Green missed. And Green will probably work to remain within the framework of acceptability for the remaining weeks of the playoff. Something I heard throughout this time period, many of which I agree with, was how greatly Green contributed to the success of the Golden State Warriors throughout their run that consisted of 4 championships and great play. So the argument is that you have to take the good with the bad. As long as there is a sustainable level of good with the level of bad that is not dwindling. I think that is the equation the Warriors will have to weigh following a season that started with a high-profile incident and will end with a request for a greater salary. We see night in and night out players taunt other players who are much more skilled and accomplished than them, hoping to get in the minds of these players to impact their performances. All-time greats, like LeBron James, have seen his shares of villains trying to force him into an off night. LeBron James continues to see players resort to antics to overcome their skill gap against one of the greatest to step on hardwood. There will always be villains in sports. Some of us can remember hockey when there were players who were on the team's roster simply for their goonish behaviors, not because of talent. Players that would start fights just to break up or shift momentum. Fortunately, that is less likely now. These villains can be a source of energy or emotional fuel to swing momentum. But, when these players become a physical threat to the well-being of the real talented stars or a detriment of the teams they play for, that is where the line needs to be drawn. There will always be voices in our society being the devil's advocate, defending behaviors that our moral compasses tell us are wrong and indefensible. But, there always is a counterargument. Not always a good one. The sports leagues will have to determine how they want their brands defined. Do you want the season defined by a stomp, groin punch, or fan altercation? Or do you want it defined by greatness on the field? That is the challenge they face. Welcome to the CRC World Discussion, where I discuss salient global current events. In this episode, I am going to discuss the social tension taking place in France, where there are staged protests and riots occurring throughout the nation. For an introduction to these issues, I am asking Brad from the CRC team to give a brief overview. There is a great level of social tension. Tension is not the right word. Social anger directed at the French government over the plan to increase the retirement age from the current age of 62 to the age of 64. Meaning that one relying on public pensions will have to work 2 years longer than anticipated before they can claim public benefits from the French public pension system. French President Emmanuel Macron invoked Article 49.3 to raise the age limit without the need of a vote per reports. The French courts have approved of the measure, which obviously is not appeasing the emotions of the opponents of the increase. In response, people opposing the increase are calling for Macron to resign. Protests are being staged at different parts of the nation. Some of these protests are reportedly becoming riots. As expected, whenever a group of people come together in a mob mentality, it will be easy for some to take an orderly planned event and descend it into chaos. One article claimed an event was a peaceful protest but at the same time described people lighting pallets on fire in public spaces, which is not peaceful by any definition. France, like other nations, needs to address pension systems that are growing closer to insolvency. Doing nothing is becoming less of an option for many economies. As more people age into the retirement class, and live longer in this age, there is a need for policymakers to make tough decisions to ensure there is some level of the needed safety net for people who have worked hard to contribute to the society. The retirement age of 62 is lower than Germany, who has a retirement age of 67. Lower than the United Kingdom, which has a retirement age of 66. Italy has a retirement age of 67. Spain has a retirement age of 65. In the United States, the retirement age is 67. So, the policy action that French President Emmanuel Macron is taking is not a radical action out of the norm. It really is simply aligning France with other industrialized nations with public pension programs. The altering of eligibility or any terms for social programs is always something that hits the nerve of many in the general public. Especially for people who pay into the system their whole working life, and when it is time for them to benefit, they are being asked to wait longer and accept less. All the while, they were never asked to pay less, but pay more and more into the system. So the political aspect of a policy change is never popular with the working class, who may be completely reliant on the public programs. The economic reality that many nations will face soon is that the public programs will have too many people drawing from the programs compared to the number of people paying into the system. Even here in the United States, we will have to find some ways to address the issue. The problem is also magnified in a bad economy. The global economy is headed towards some level of recession or stagnation, which is not a good thing for public safety nets. Public safety nets operate on taking funds from people currently working and not drawing from the program and paying people who are in the retirement class, while investing part of the funds to grow the pool. Obviously, if those investments are lower in value and more people are drawing a guaranteed amount, there is a problem where the program can become insolvent and unable to pay its commitments. There are not many popular solutions available. Raising taxes for these programs is not ideal in a bad economy and can help promote unemployment, which is already the possible symptom of the collective response to inflation both here in the United States and abroad. In Europe, the tax levels are fairly high. Can the average French worker really afford to see more of their take-home pay go towards another social program? Probably not. Another unpopular idea, but less toxic approach is usually changing the eligibility age. People are living longer and working longer. Pushing the age does not seem like a major inconvenience. But, certain professions, the work conditions and ability to meet those requirements are more challenging the older you get. One solution that I think might help, but also will not be popular, is restricting eligibility based on economic wealth. Those with a certain level of wealth should not draw upon public programs. To be clear, I am not an anti-wealthy economist. I think people should be compensated for ingenuity, productivity, hard work, successful risk-taking, and ambition. I think the wealthy benefit our societies and economies in many ways that I have described in my content for years. This is not an attack on the wealthy. But, I do think that people with great resources should be completely self-sufficient. The argument would be that they paid into these programs, which is correct. But, they should manage their wealth so they do not need the benefits to preserve them for those who truly need them. The challenge would obviously be how to determine that number cap. One could appear wealthy on paper, but may not be liquid as one would think. There are always extenuating circumstances. But, obviously, a person who is a billionaire should not be eligible for these benefits. They should have a private plan set up from their compensation. The super rich should have the common sense to establish annuities that will provide them with a comfortable retirement in those years. Another idea would be expanding incentives for people to establish private retirement funds. This would help reduce the size of the benefit if there can be a private-public mix in the future. This would help encourage savings and investments. I know the detractors would complain about the impact on tax revenues. I am not a proponent of the notion that every tax break needs to be replaced with a tax elsewhere or cut. The benefit is less dependency on the public option. Protecting the solvency of these public programs. In regards to these issues, there is not going to be an easy solution. As I always state, there are positive and negative outcomes for every policy approach. The goal should be to maximize the amount of positive for the greatest number of people, while mitigating the extent and impact of the negative. We need ideas that will protect the programs for future generations while reducing the impact of the difficult choice that only becomes more painful the longer we delay. Neither the United States nor Europe can continue to kick this can down the road much longer. We may be running out of road. I thank you for experiencing this episode, The CRC World. Come back for more each week. Welcome to the CRC Society, where we debate salient current events taking place in our society. In this edition, I am going to challenge both Adriana and Jennifer to debate whether Joe Biden should run for a second term, what that would look like, and what the impact would be if he did win another term. Let us start with Adriana.
Welcome. Should President Joe Biden run for another term as President of the United States? On face value, I think many people will have the gut reaction of no way in hell. But he is. The Joe Biden era has not been one memorable for positives. The Biden administration continues to struggle in every facet of running the federal government and has allowed so much decline and chaos to occur during their time in office. While they want to use the Obama antic of blame your predecessor, Biden is more responsible for his shortcomings as president because there is clear connection between his policy actions, either being executive orders or legislation he championed, and the decline we have experienced. Upon coming into office, he issued executive orders that negatively impacted our domestic energy production. Not a right-wing conspiracy theory. Rather something you can find when searching his executive orders on the White House website. Failure to prevent Russia from their invasion also impacted energy prices and the skyrocketing inflation, but that also is his failure. In 2020, the Biden brand was based on experience as a senator and former vice president. Being not Trump. Also, not being the radical progressives that clearly were taking hold of his Democratic Party. Now, we know that we should want good political experience, not just any experience. We know he is obsessed with Trump, while failing to match the policy effectiveness Trump provided. He is just as chaotic, but in a different manner. Trump was a hothead taking on all comers. Biden does not appear to be in control of his faculties. And Biden does not stand up well to progressives. I think he will run because there is no one in his party that is competent and has broad appeal. Kamala Harris is not liked by the public and people do not want someone who thinks they can cackle away our real problems. Depending on who the GOP nominee is, Biden might not be able to win another term. Now, I turn the floor over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Adriana, and welcome to all in our audience. I do not think he should run for another term in office, but unfortunately he is. Success in the future is largely based on samples from the past, especially if it involves the same role. He has not been an effective leader during his term in office. Biden has completely failed to deliver results for the American people. Our economy is heading towards a recession, which was highly unlikely at the time he took office. Yet, his policies made it a reality. Our national security has regressed. Border security is non-existent. And his foreign policy is bringing us closer to global conflict once again. Domestically, he is not a uniter. America is far more divided now than during the Obama era, the Trump era, and the days when he took office. Biden is a partisan, and the only thing Americans are united on is the perception that he is not effective as president. America was supposed to see a president that would improve our global reputation. Although many did not have a problem with our global reputation during the Trump era, where America first finally put our interests at the forefront of the diplomatic efforts by our representatives. Yet, we are seeing the world break down once again between good and evil. Biden wants credit for uniting our allies. But our allies were united by Russian troops crossing the Ukrainian border. The case the Biden administration attempted to make did not sway our allies towards any real action. Only when there was an irreversible threat that occurred was any real call to action possible. The results have been fleeting. I agree that there is not any real appeal this time around for Biden. What has gone on since January 20, 2021 that you want to see happen again? The Phillies and Eagles making it to their respective championships? Not something he had any role in. He does not really have a realistic case. Although, I do not believe he will let the truth prevent his team from writing their version of a story. I do not think he should run again, but he probably will run again. He will try to recapture the anti-Trump stance. Try to run on past resentments and hysteria. We want candidates that make us feel good about voting for them, not just trying to make us vote against the other guy. There is no realistic appeal for this fledgling presidency. But, there is no one in the Democratic Party's pipeline that will have broad appeal. California Governor Gavin Newsom was almost recalled. Kamala Harris is not a viable candidate. Michelle Obama or Jill Biden are not really serious candidates. And both hold views just as bad as their husbands. I do think Biden will run out of necessity for the party to have a candidate. But he will not be able to hide in the White House or return to the comfortable confines of his Delaware basement.
Thank you, Adriana and Jennifer. We now know he is running in 2024 on qualities that he does not define. He is not the candidate for freedom, the middle class shrunk under him. And the soul of our nation is not doing well because of the decline and deterioration he personally oversaw. He has to run because Democrats have not other choice. But no president has seen as much purposeful failure as Biden has. We will discuss more in depth next week. Thank you for experiencing the CRC Society on the Christopher Peter Review. Please come back next week for more. I thank you for experiencing this episode of the Christopher Peter Review. Please continue to visit the Christopher Peter Review at www.crcreview.com.